Rubble's kennel lurched violently, another powerful slam ricocheting off the inner walls. Zuma jumped backward, confused and terrified, feral instincts screaming at him to run, yet he remained paralyzed in fear. Marshall and Rocky quickly withdrew back into their own kennels as the noise sounded again. Whatever was inside Rubble's den, it was angry and powerful, charging itself into every surface to break free from the prison. The shuttered door that acted as the entrance to the kennel was meaningless. A display of power was in order. The creature wanted to break out, tear down the walls, and rip its scaffolding to shreds. It wasn't just a desire to escape, it wanted to reveal itself. Chase could hardly believe what he was hearing, and with every effort in his small body, he pushed back the crippling horror inside and called out to the Labrador. "Zuma! Get back!" The lab finally came to, snapping back to reality as he shook his head. He quickly turned tail and ran, charging away from the kennel and diving into his own. Chase took a few steps back, looking to the door of the tower, mind racing if he could get there in time. Another bang. The kennel's walls began to jut out awkwardly, slightly bending. A lingering feeling began to possess the air around them, a horrific shriek of confusion and terror. Chase's heartbeat skipped over itself, its own thumps feeling like punches to the head, his breathing intensifying as his mind fought to keep control of his body. His vision seemed to blur, but this time he knew he wasn't going crazy. Farrak's malice was real. He couldn't abandon his friends, not now. Holding his breath, the shepherd turned and charged as fast as he could to Marshall's kennel. The Dalmatian was cowering in the back, keeping his face hidden in his paws as if looking up was a death sentence. Chase entered the kennel swiftly and nearly threw himself against the wall, almost flattening himself against it. His heart beating like mad, he slowly moved his head, looking out from the firefighter's den. The banging had stopped, and the creature went silent. What was Farrak's malice? Dog? Human? He thought back to the image Cyrus had slipped him so long ago. He remembered seeing what he only assumed was a normal dog. Only the head was visible in the photo, but it was assumed to be the only part of the body intact. Everything from the neck down was all bone, blood, veins, and muscle. That was what Cyrus had said. Chase couldn't say anything from his view, just the still-standing kennel that had belonged to a now-deceased bulldog. "What's it doing?" Chase muttered to himself, daring to push himself a little farther out. The noise had gone silent. Was the monster truly unable to escape the kennel? "Chase!" he heard behind him, nearly making him jump. Marshall had picked his head up ever so slightly, exposing his vulnerable blue eyes. "What is that thing?" His voice could barely keep up with his own breaths. The shepherd tried to explain. Stay here. I need to call Cyrus." The sentence had barely left his mouth when Chase stopped cold, a realization hitting him like a car on the road. The only way to contact the ACG now was through the special pup tag they had given him. A pup tag which he had thrown aside in the boiler room, along with his only weapon. "Shit!" Chase said quietly, darting his eyes around as he cursed himself over and over for discarding the only means of communication he had. He had to get back to Sky, get back and retrieve his gun and tag. He just had to get back to the elevator. "Chase?" Marshall quivered, starting to hyperventilate. Just stay in here, growled the shepherd as he took a step outside the kennel into the rain. The most violent, brutal clanging sound suddenly howled through the air, deafening all 4 dogs as a metal roof was kicked out, steel bolts and fillings flying off and dropping to the floor like used cigarettes. The rest of Rubble's kennel quickly caved in, crashing to the ground in a large scrap heap as dust filled the air. Chase instantly retracted back into Marshall's den like a fearful turtle. There was a solid moment of silence in the air, nothing but the rain hitting the roofs able to be heard. Swallowing his instincts, Chase crept forward again, peeking outside. From his position, he could see the ruins of the yellow kennel, nothing more than a massive pile of wood and metal. Keeping as low as he could, Chase couldn't take his eyes off the wreckage, too fearful to make the smallest move. A distant hissing sound filled the air of the clearing, which quickly darkened into low, bear-like growling. Then it stood up. The creature stood on 4 legs and reared up to its full, terrifying height, no longer bound by the low ceiling of the kennel. Chase's eyes widened at its height, watching it rise high above the kennels as its head picked up. The puppy stood horrified at the sight. The monster's body resembled that of a degloved 4-legged monster. It was composed entirely of a long, thin skeleton, crudely wrapped in bleeding raw muscles and pulsating organs that shone in the wet rain. Blue veins wrapped around its torso, bleeding down its arms and up its neck like netting. Intestine-like organs wrapped down its legs like ribbons, as if it had stolen Rubble's insides to build up its body. It was a creature that haunted nightmares, a sentient monster of gore and innards that lurked within the darkness of the mind. Its head was the only vaguely normal feature. It was the head of a shepherd-like dog, only it was torn and shredded along the mouth and around the eye sockets. One of its tall ears was ripped apart, making one wonder if it was merely a skin mask for the grotesque animal that wore it. Chase briefly questioned how a monster that erupted from a bulldog would look like a shepherd, until he remembered that Ferox Malice likely carried the DNA of anyone and everyone it infected, even between different bodies. Then another thought entered his mind, overriding the previous one. Had Rubble cut the mask from a victim long ago and was merely keeping it stored away until it was time? Chase couldn't figure out which scenario he preferred. For all he knew, the face it wore could have belonged to a poor dog that fell victim to the monster a long time ago. It was near impossible to see any trace of Rubble in the monster. His organs and innards had been assimilated into Ferox Malice's body, with the remains of dozens of others long absorbed within it. Ferox Malice quivered in place for a moment, seemingly twitching as if it was getting accustomed to being exposed again. Chase swore it was a trick of the eyes, but he drew back in horror as intestine-like tentacles began to emit from the monster's back. They writhed like living worms, almost with a mind of their own, tearing out of Ferox Malice like squirming appendages. Taking a deep breath of air, Ferox Malice raised its elongated front leg, so thin it couldn't have been more than a few inches in diameter, and planted it down in the mud, its paws built from clumps of muscle mass, with long, razor-like claws jutting out. "Dear God," Chase could barely whisper as he watched from Marshall's kennel, sounding more like a cry. Taking a few large, slow steps forward, Ferox Malice growled as it looked around, curling its lips to reveal glistening fangs. Scanning the clearing, The ears of its mask pricked as blood dripped from its mouth. Its body emitted sounds as it moved. The paws, if one could even call them that, would scrunch into the ground, tapping its claws impatiently. Its bones almost constantly popped, each movement, each step, radiating the same sound anyone would when cracking their knuckles. A thin tail that consisted of a single rope-like strand of intestine followed it, gracefully moving through the air. Despite having no skin below the neck and being a mere amalgamation of bone and muscle, an unnatural physicality kept its body functioning to near perfection. Cyrus did say it escaped from a facility, likely under the noses of hundreds of scientists studying its fascinating biology. After a moment, it reared back its head, taking in a large gulp of air, then snapped forward, unhinging its fanged mouth and releasing a distressing, inhumane, and animalistic roar that penetrated the air. Its screech was loud, cutting into Chase's eardrums and forcing them open, reaching its claws in and gripping his brain. Marshall threw himself under his bed as the scream filled the air, while Rocky retracted under his table. Zuma stood in his den wide-eyed, the monster's roar freezing him in place, swirling around him like a tornado of fire. The scream Ferox Malice emitted was an unholy combination of several noises. The sounds of people screaming for their lives, old and young, dogs, and cats wailing in agony as they were cornered, and other screams from countless living that would be impossible to label. All victims, all their voices and tongues were stolen away to produce one terrible sound emitted from its maw. The roar seemed to have an effect on those around it. Chase, for a moment, felt oddly calm, but he quickly snapped back to reality as he watched the creature. The monster of gore breathed out a feral snarl, then began walking out of view as its worm-like tail followed behind it. Chase quickly eyed the elevator to the tower. The urge to sprint for it was incredible. His vision trailed to the kennels, all dormant vehicles waiting to be activated. Was it even possible to drive away? The simple act of starting an engine would immediately alert the creature with its noise, exposing the driver as if it was a giant spotlight shining on them. It was too dangerous of an option, prompting a whimper from Chase as he looked back toward the elevator. Blinking in confusion, he realized Ferox Malice had completely left his field of vision, leaving him with Marshall in a storm of terror and uncertainty. Looking back, he spotted the small head of a Dalmatian peeking under a bed. The spotted puppy was visibly breaking down. "What's happening?" Marshall squeaked, tears forming streaks down his cheeks. Grimacing, Chase crept over to his friend and tried to speak as softly as he could. "Marshall, do you remember those drills we practiced? Where I would make everyone get under a table and be quiet?" The Dalmatian nodded. "Well, this is what we practiced for," he sighed, trying to hide his own fearfulness. "Hide, and do not come out until I say so. I'm handling this." The smaller dog nodded as he further hid under the bed. "Okay." Trying to regain his composure, Chase turned and took a step outside. A pounding thump suddenly sounded, directly above them on the kennel. It was so abrasive and quick, the whole den swayed. The shepherd froze mid-step, turning back to see Marshall about to scream, already opening his mouth. Within a second, Chase jumped across the floor and clamped his paw over the Dalmatian's mouth, suppressing his cry. The sound of something large slowly dragged itself onto the roof above them, scratching its claws along the metal roof, hissing as it gained higher ground. Chase had to nearly suffocate Marshall as he drove his paw into the Dalmatian's mouth. The spotted dog was shaking, losing control of himself, and in one wrong move, he would panic and doom them all. A long, slithering appendage of intestine suddenly dropped down in front of the entrance right before the puppy's eyes. Marshall was still silenced, but his eyes went wide, and Chase couldn't help but draw back himself. They stood motionless as Ferox Malice's tail slowly slithered around, briefly grazing over the floor of the kennel. It pulled to the side out of view as Ferox Malice turned around, stalking on the roof as its body bristled. Unsatisfied, it growled and moved off the kennel, Chase continuing to hold his friend down as they witnessed its legs step down in front of them. It was hunting them. It would not leave the area until every single living creature in the area was ripped apart and consumed. It was unclear just how intelligent it was. Was it truly overlooking its prey in the obvious kennels, or was it merely toying with them? Ferox Malice was a malicious creature, but was it so sadistic it basked in the fear and suffering of others? Chase watched it skulk away, walking off as it went around the back of the tower, its tentacles and tails trailing behind it like bloodied, floating ribbons. The creature was unnaturally fast, its slow moving at the beginning merely being that of a morning stretch. It moved quickly, walking through the clearing in only a few seconds. Chase shuddered at the thought of it running. If there was any window of time, it was now. "I'm going," Chase said as he released Marshall, who collapsed to the floor. His friend attempted to respond, but he made a small choking noise, then suddenly threw up on the floor. The intense anxiety and confusion had taken control of his stomach from him. "Like I said, hide," the shepherd repeated one last time, grimacing at Marshall's condition. Taking a deep breath, Chase walked out of the kennel into the rain, exposing himself in the open. At first, he tried to stay low, walking past each kennel and getting glimpses of the others hiding. He couldn't hear or see the creature, only distant growls and faint rustling noises. Moving felt like ages, but the shepherd didn't dare to do anything more than a crouched walk. Even his tail dragging in the mud behind him was making him paranoid, a sudden urge to cough tickling up his throat. Heart beating seemingly louder than the overhead thunder, Chase crawled through the open doors of the elevator. He had to get back to the boiler room, retrieve his gun and radio, and it would all be over. He cursed himself for not seeing it in rubble earlier. Surely there had been some early warning sign that he was not himself. Whatever it had been, it completely flew over his head. Careful to not make a sound, he reached a paw out to the buttons. The sound of busting metal filled the air, making Chase jump in surprise. He jerked away and looked around fearfully, but he saw nothing. In that instance, the lights of the elevator flickered before completely going dead, bathing him in darkness. What? The puppy quivered, racing to the buttons and pressing them. The elevator was unresponsive, even as he hit every button he could. "No," he breathed out, beginning to panic. "You bastard!" It cut the power and completely blocked off the elevator access. Ferox Malice had actually found the outside breaker box, the hub for all electric systems of the tower, and damaged it. How in the world did it know to do that? How would it even know what a breaker box was? How would it even have the cognitive understanding to know to destroy it? Chase shuddered as hundreds of questions filled his mind, terror rising as he realized how exposed he was. Ferox Malice was more than any kind of animal the world had ever seen. The way it tore down the solid metal that was Rubble's kennel, the sheer amount of hysteria that it caused just from emerging, and its intelligence Cyrus had warned him so desperately about. It clearly possessed a high cognitive, almost human level of understanding and problem solving. To deliberately recognize an advantage and snap it like a twig, hunting was its dreaded strength, and its ability to hide within bodies as a mere cell. It was a beautiful predator, animalistic perfection in every sense of the word, a higher organism among static-minded animals, a true perfect creature. Chase frantically looked around, trying to find anywhere to go. He was a sitting duck in the opened, deactivated elevator. All it would take is a passing glance inside to see him. If the monster was truly toying with them, how long until it ended the game, forcing them into the kennels and tearing them apart one by one? Without thinking, Chase ran, jumping out of the elevator and running to the nearest kennel. He sprinted into Zuma's place, quickly getting against the wall. The lab jumped in surprise at the action. "Ah!" said the frightened dog, quickly recoiling. "Dude, don't do that!" "Quiet!" snapped the shepherd, motioning for him to shut up. "I need to get upstairs." "Why? You can't leave us down here." "I left... There's a radio in the boiler room." He quickly corrected himself. "If I get it back, I can alert the ACG and get them here to contain that thing." "So why don't you?" Zuma said, looking around fearfully. The distant sound of growling was circling the tower, and he quickly lowered himself and moved into a corner. "Because that thing cut the power!" Zuma's eyes went wide. "It knew how to do that?" "I don't know what it knows," Chase said, his voice shaking. "And I'm not going to take any chances with it either." "Well, now what?" the lab said with a hiss. "Are we just going to die here?" No, I have a plan," he reassured. "Stay here." "I wasn't fucking going anywhere else," Zuma growled, retracting further. Taking a brief look outside, Chase caught a glimpse of what he thought were tentacles disappearing behind some trees. The rain made it difficult to see, and he knew Ferox Malice had no intention of leaving. Slipping outside, he quickly made his way over to Rocky's kennel, trying to ignore the pounding distress in his heart. He tried as hard as he could to show the other dogs he wasn't afraid, yet a part of him wanted to crawl under a bed and hide until all the noises ceased for good. He came to the front door of the green kennel and saw that the door had been closed. Looking around fearfully, Chase tapped the door. "Rocky, it's me! Open the door!" No response. "Rocky, come on!" he hissed, knowing how vulnerable he was out in the open. "It's me!" After several uncomfortable seconds outside, he heard the mix shuffle up to the door and nose it open. "Chase!" He was interrupted as the shepherd wedged his own nose under the door and forced it open, jumping inside. The officer shut the door as quickly as he entered, breathing heavily as he turned to his gray friend. "I just can't sit out there forever, you know!" "Sorry." Rocky lowered his head, then looked out. "That thing, what is it?" "I don't really know," Chase said, looking over at Rocky's tools. "But it's lethal and pissed off." "What are we supposed to do?" The mix silently started hyperventilating. "We're just puppies!" "I have a plan." The shepherd nodded, then turned back to his friend. "But I need your help." "My help?" Coming forward to the mix and sitting down in front of him, Chase reached out with his front paws and grabbed Rocky's shoulders, pulling him close. Rocky, you need to listen to me. The mix nodded, although uncertain. I don't know anyone better with machines than you, he explained. I need you to go out there. What? Rocky recoiled in his grip. What? It's really simple. The simplest thing you could ever do, Chase assured him, keeping a hold on the mix. I need you to look at the breaker box and find out how we can fix it. We need power back in the tower. It's imperative. There's no one else here who would know how to do something like that, he said, drawing out his word to make sure Rocky was processing it. I'd go with you, but 2 would draw more attention and probably get us both killed. Go out there? Rocky breathed. With that thing walking around? If you see it or hear it, hide, the shepherd explained. Be as quiet as possible. Do not run unless absolutely necessary. Does it have heat vision? Chase blinked, looking aside for a moment. I mean, Cyrus never really said anything about that. If it did, it probably would have found all of us by now. He didn't want to scare the mix any more than he probably already had been, but running was likely a death sentence. If Farak's malice was truly as fast as he was suspecting, trying to outrun it was not an option. Rocky stammered, shaking. Get over there, Chase instructed. Look over the breakers, come back and tell me how you can fix it. Hide if you see or hear anything. Got it? After a moment, Rocky nodded fearfully. I'm counting on you. Chase licked his friend's nose, trying to get his tail wagging, smiling, or anything to ease his fears. The storm surged overhead as Rocky left his kennel. His legs were shaking as he stepped outside into his worst nightmare. Rain, he breathed out, cringing to himself. He was willing to brave the water for the sake of the mission, but he was beyond uncomfortable. It was the worst experience Rocky had ever put himself into. Not only was he walking out into the groping hands of the cold rain, but there was actively a threat lurking outside seeking to tear him to pieces. A shiver ran through his body as he was already freezing cold. Okay, he breathed to himself, glancing behind him. Breaker box. Willing his paws to finally start moving, he crept past Zuma's kennel, wincing as he waded through a puddle that came up to his chest. Horrid memories returned to him the farther he sunk into the mud, creeping up his neck and staining his fur with dirty sludge. Leering static began to leach into his head as he passed the elevator, a distant ringing in his ears as his breathing quickened. Looking around, he didn't see Farak's malice anywhere. Had it walked off? Shaking his head of the noise and static, Rocky crept behind the tower, keeping an eye out and doing his best to mentally block out the cold. The blades of grass that brushed against his stomach as he passed over were bringing back dark memories. But all he wanted now was to prove that he wasn't weak. He barely survived the ACG's brutality. Rocky knew it hard he was the patrol's weakling. That had to change. Facing death was not the method he had planned on using. He turned the corner, checking his surroundings. Farak's malice was again nowhere to be seen, and Rocky raised an eyebrow. Suddenly, his heart sank as a realization hit him, and he slowly looked upwards. He saw nothing but the sky, and he let out a sigh of relief, although anxiety still churned within him. Finally approaching the large breaker box that sat bolted into the wall, the mix could already see sparks flying out of it. With one final look around, Rocky hurried over in front of it and investigated the damage. The box had been smashed inwards, likely from Farak's malice striking it bluntly. The damage was minimal, but still left the tower powerless. The breakers for the elevator and upper floors were completely destroyed and would have to be entirely replaced. Not all the breakers had been broken, however, as Rocky could see the one labeled basement systems was still on a green light. I didn't know we had a basement, he thought aloud, then wondered if it was where Ryder had been building their things all these years. It could be repaired, but he knew he'd need a special tool. The breakers had to be carefully removed and possibly rewired just for good measure. He needed a particular tool to remove the breakers from the box, a tool he absolutely didn't have. But if Ryder completed most of his builds in the basement, it was a likely location to find it. Rocky nodded and turned to head back. The ground suddenly moved from beneath him, making him sway and taking the mix off guard. He stumbled to keep himself standing, his fear returning to him as he was unsure of even moving. A large fuzzy gopher quickly popped out of the ground, spraying dirt across a small radius. It seemed scared, and Rocky was about to approach it when his instinct suddenly froze his step. The gopher ran away, seemingly from nothing, as fast as its little legs could carry it. Like a bullet through the air, a bloody tentacle shot out of the tall grass, completely skewering through the gopher's body like a spear. Biting back a scream, Rocky backed away as the screaming rodent was lifted off the ground, the appendage firmly ensnaring through it. Emerging from the darkness, Farrak's malice stood up as it stared down at its prey, its tail brutally speared through it. It had been waiting, sitting patiently as it somehow lured the animal out of its safety. The gopher was lifted up before the creature's eyes, tiny gurgled screams filling the air as the predator stared into it. Overcome with fear, Rocky broke into a sprint, his mind going into override and spiking his flight instinct. All he could hear was the carnage, as the gopher's screams were pulled from its vocal cords and swallowed by the monster. The static in his head seemed to explode, almost fully taking control of him as he ran dangerously close to the creature as he passed. Rocky finally tore back into his kennel, sobbing as he dove inside. Chase quickly shut the door and wrapped the terrified Mix in a hug. They had made progress now, but Farrak's malice wasn't finished with them yet. The rain continued to fall, soon overflowing the ground with 2 inches of water and clouds of mud. A haunting shriek was sent through the air and was quickly met with screams of agony as a gopher was ripped to shreds. The commotion attracted Zuma's attention, and he poked his brown muzzle outside his kennel. His body was shaking. He had just spent solid minutes pressed against the back wall of his den when the creature had emerged and began walking. Sticking his nose out in the rain, he fearfully caught sight of Farrak's malice catching a small rodent and eviscerating it. With the predator distracted, Zuma spotted Rocky sprinting back into his kennel. For a moment, the lab felt a flicker of solace knowing his friend was safe, only for it to die away once he realized the inconsistency of that statement. What was truly safe? How long until the monster realized to squat down and peer into the kennels? The doors were merely sheet metal or wood. They wouldn't stand a chance to the creature's might. With shaking breath, he took a glance at Marshall's kennel. The door was wide open, sending a shockwave of alarm through the lab. All it took was one passing glance inside, and Marshall would meet the creature's claws. He had to move. Watching Farrak's malice grip the bones of a rodent and pull them out was a grisly scene, but he needed to watch its movements to know if the coast was clear. After taking a deep breath and a feeble effort to calm himself, he took a step outside, further exposing himself in the open. Wanting to make haste, yet suppress as much noise as possible, he left the limited safety of the kennel and trekked to Marshall's place. Careful not to scare the frail dog, Zuma stuck his head in first, scanning the interior of the firefighter's den until he spotted a tail sticking out from under a bed. "Marshall!" he tried to call out, looking around before creeping inside. "Are you okay?" No response. Zuma knew he was scared, just as he was, but this was no time to panic. As much as he wanted to crawl into a cabinet and hide until the sun returned, he had to help his friends. He didn't trust Chase to take the lead, not in a time like this, and he was already suspecting the shepherd had some skeletons in the closet. "Marshall," he repeated, coming closer. "It's me, Zuma." He tried not to yell, keeping his voice low, despite having no idea how efficient the monster's hearing was. "Come on, please, stay with me." The tail quickly retracted into the bed, and the dog underneath shuffled around. Zuma took another worried look outside as Marshall stuck out his head, so terrified one would think his spots would fall off. "Zuma?" he quivered. "Is that you?" "Of course." The lab turned back to him. "Who else?" "Chase said that thing can hide inside others." "I don't think Chase is a reliable source at the moment," Zuma said, narrowing his eyes and glancing toward Rocky's kennel where the others were hiding. "But I am. You can talk to me." Marshall was about to say something when a sound met his ears. Zuma heard it as well, a low, layered growl of dozens of voices at once. It was nearby and picked the tiny skeleton into a mess of puzzle pieces for scavenging buzzards. Now its attention was elsewhere, roving the clearing for dogs foolish enough to stray in its path. Zuma couldn't see where it had gone, and he didn't dare leave Marshall's kennel for a better view. He attempted to sniff for it, but his sense of smell was blocked by the unending dew the rain carried down. "We're not safe," Zuma concluded. He didn't dare let Marshall in on the fact that they were likely not safe anywhere to begin with. A few kennels down, Chase was trying to calm Rocky back into his senses. The mixed breed was not only drenched in his biggest phobia, but had also witnessed the merciless nature of the creature. His heart ached for his friend's distress, yet he felt slight frustration at Rocky's inattentive state. After quickly drying him off, Chase looked down at the cowering mix. "Rocky, come on!" the shepherd growled. "Get a hold of yourself!" An echoing roar sounded from across the clearing, putting Chase on alert as he snapped his attention outside. Flicking his eyes around, he only saw the night shrouded outside and the continuous falling of rain. "Rocky," he said again, turning his ears around to try and tune himself to the direction of the noise. His voice was quickly rising as severity and dread filled his mind. "Rocky, come on! I need you here and now!" He instinctively backed away from the entrance, retreating into the den. He still heard no reply from his friend. The gray dog was hunched over on his bed, shaking like a child hiding from their horrid family. Impatient, he turned and grabbed Rocky by the shoulders. "Rocky!" he snapped as quietly as possible, giving the mix a single violent shake. The mix blinked at the sudden motion, meeting Chase's gaze with quickened breaths. "You there?" Chase raised an eyebrow. "You alive?" Rocky quickly snapped back to reality, shaking his head and jabbing a paw forward to shove Chase off. "Get off me!" Falling on his side, the gray puppy was overcome with fear as his body shook. The tail! Chase, it's tail! Stumbling, Chase flattened his ears with an agitated look. What? What are you talking about? The creature! Its tail is a weapon! Rocky said, choking on his own words. A really long and fast weapon! I saw it kill a... So what? The shepherd interrupted him, annoyed at Rocky's irritating state. The whole damn thing is a weapon! Did you think the rest of it was safe? Get a hold of yourself and stop zoning out on me! Hey, next time you're going out there to witness the most horrible thing in your life, Rocky said, returning the annoyance tenfold. You expect me to be calm with that thing on the prowl? Just tell me how to fix the breakers. The mix sighed and grimaced for a moment. It smashed the box in. About half of the breakers are damaged. I can fix it, but I'll need time and a special tool. What kind of tool? A dielectric driver. I can't replace them without this thing, and I don't have one. Seriously? Chase slapped his paw on his face. I figured you of all dogs would. Can we use anything else? Rocky bristled slightly, annoyed at his friend's impatience. No. Given the damage, which probably goes deeper given all the wiring, if I use anything else, it either won't work or I'll get electrocuted. Both dogs stopped as sounds emitted from outside. The taps and scratches of plastic were audible, as well as the echoing pounds of a large creature walking. Chase flattened his ears, lowering himself. It's on another kennel. The noise wasn't directly above them, meaning they weren't yet in mortal danger. But how soon until they were? Rocky quickly stepped back. Chase, I can't fix the box without the driver. You honestly don't have one? The shepherd argued. Clearly they're important to an extent. Ryder never gave me one, shot back the mix. In fact, he never let me handle tools like that to begin with. Always just screwdrivers and hammers, never anything interesting. Wait, you said half the breakers, Chase suddenly put together. What's still working? The mix shook his head, struggling to remember. I think it was for a basement. Everything in the tower itself is dead, but there's still power underground. Underground, the shepherd thought aloud. That includes the boiler room? Your guess is as good as mine, Chase. I didn't even know we had a room like that. Well, I guess we do, and I need to get in there. Chase grimaced, remembering his cardinal mistake of throwing away the ACG's radio and gun. Do you have any idea where Ryder might have kept one of those tools? Rocky thought for a moment, looking at the ground until he got an idea. Probably in his garage with his ATV? The garage door is closed. We don't have any way of getting in there without power, hissed the police dog. Well, there has to be a way, Rocky exclaimed in his desperation. But if it will shut you up, I'll look if I have anything that can help. Chase stuttered in confusion as Rocky suddenly got up from his position and walked over to his desk in the corner. He started opening several drawers and rifling through them, grunting in agitation when he didn't find what he needed. Chase wanted to ask what he was looking for, only for him to quickly dodge items as they were tossed away. Rocky's desk was filled to the brim with junk, as numerous things were tossed to the floor. The shepherd rolled his eyes as screws were dumped, wrenches of various sizes, and a blowtorch. Taking another look behind him, Chase swallowed and dared himself to peek outside. The nerves were killing him. The inability to find or sense the threat outside was filling him with paranoia. Quietly moving forward, Chase poked his head out into the rain and frantically looked in all directions, fearing being exposed for even a second would be his death. His eyes finally rested on a startling sight. Farak's malice was not just standing on top of Zuma's kennel, but leaning its head over, looking through its entrance and scanning the den. Its back tentacles were groping around the structure, seemingly latching onto it in the event it would need to climb inside the kennel from upside down. Its long tail danced in the air, quivering with anticipation. Chase gulped and pulled himself back in. "Rocky, it's starting to look in the kennels!" He frantically tried to hide the quivering fear in his voice. "Whatever you're looking for, find it now!" "Got it!" Rocky gripped a blue roll of paper in his teeth and pulled it out of a cabinet. "What is that?" "Blueprint of the tower," the mix replied, dropping the paper and letting it unroll on the ground. "Ryder gave me this when he tasked me with fixing some of the pipes. I guess he never asked for it back." Chase came forward to study the paper. It was a detailed description of the lookout tower, complete with exact measurements, and every single nook and cranny was well documented. Chase pointed to a small rectangle below the tower diagram. "That's the boiler room. That's where I need to go." "Hey, what about the vent system?" Rocky pointed at a faint network of lines that formed a grid around the tower. The shepherd narrowed his eyes until the lights came on in his head. "You're right. Look, there's one that connects to the outside. If we get the covers open, we should be able to get inside. Looks like it's just around the tower. Somewhere behind it, it looks like. We need to get the others." Chase quickly glanced outside. "Assuming that thing hasn't gotten them." His words were met with a shocked bark from an appalled Mix. "What? Don't say things like that!" "Just get ready to move." With his idea now churning in his head, Chase glanced outside, only to be confused as Ferox Malice was nowhere to be seen. The pouring rain did make it difficult to see, but a creature like that would stand out in the open. Confusingly, the monster was seemingly gone, vanished from eyesight. With small sounds of bewilderment, he pushed himself out farther to get a better look around. "Where'd it go?" Chase shook his head, slightly fearful but relieved that the coast was clear. Small droplets hit his head, making him remember that he was in the rain. Sighing, he shook his head to get the water off, scattering droplets around him. He was about to walk back inside when something quickly caught his eye. Red droplets. In a small radius around him, several drops of red were spread about. Chase narrowed his eyes and looked down at the odd stains, trying to figure out where they could have come from. "Hey Rocky, are you seeing this?" he called back to his friend. The Mix turned around. "Seeing what?" He quickly stopped, suddenly freezing up and backing away. Chase noted his friend's sudden terror and gave him a puzzled look. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Chase?" Rocky quivered. "There's blood on your head!" "On my..." the shepherd repeated, still confused. "What?" He reached a paw up and slicked back the fur on his head. Bringing his arm back down, he held out his paw in front of him, and nearly choked when he saw his pads covered in crimson red blood. "What?" he tried to say, looking to his side back out in the clearing. He quickly spotted Zuma staring at him, eyes also wide with fear and muzzle agape. It was then Chase had a haunting realization. The drops hitting his head weren't rain at all. A screech filled the air. Ferox Malice jumped off Rocky's kennel and landed with a splash of water and mud. It was an ambush, its body blocking the way into the kennel as Chase fell backward in alarm. The shepherd's eyes widened, his own words overlapping as his heart skipped a beat. He landed on his back like an overturned turtle, screaming as he flailed in the mud. Stalking before him, Ferox Malice stared down at the helpless puppy, hissing as it walked forward. No! No! Chase's paws finally caught traction, staring up in paralyzed terror at the creature. The rain beat down, bathing the creature and giving it a lovely shine, while also mockingly showering water into Chase's eyes. With every fiber in his being, he tried to crawl backward, making feeble distance as Farrak's malice continued to walk, closing the area between them. With every few feet Chase crawled away, the creature would make in a single step. It watched Chase's horror, his distress, his fear, and basked in every second of it. The sheer terror it pulled from its victims was like a rush of the strongest drug out there. The tentacles that lined its body vibrated to life, unwrapping from its torso and reaching forward. Chase! Zuma howled from across the clearing, frozen in terror at the sight of the perfect predator. No! Chase helplessly waved his paw at the creature, like the gesture alone would be enough to ward it off. Get away! Get away from me! The police dog stumbled backward, panicking as he frantically pushed himself back. The mud was catching him, slowly pulling him into a sinking hindrance that would take his life. The creature before him merely followed steadily, emitting a low hiss as it stared down into him with its torn, beady eyes. It completely towered over Chase, nearly 5 times his size, and possibly even larger. Frantic, Rocky turned back to his things and desperately searched for anything that could help. His eyes raced over every item at his disposal. The vents! Chase called to his friends. Use the vents to get in the tower! The mix looked over the objects on the floor and quickly spotted the blowtorch. Heart racing, he grabbed the small tool by its handle and raced to the front of the kennel. Chase's life was flashing before his eyes as he backed up into the soiled puddles that flooded the clearing, his gaze locked with that of the monster. Rocky raced to the front, then quickly backed up from Farrak's malice flicking tail, eagerly beginning to twist and contort. Thinking fast, Rocky turned his head to the side and sharply tossed out the tool as hard as he could. The blowtorch sailed under the creature's legs and landed in the mud with a splat. Chase quickly glanced down at it, then realized. As his life depended on it, he grabbed the blowtorch in his teeth, already hearing a snarl from the creature in response. He kicked the valve on the back as far to the right as it would go, held up the torch, prayed to whatever god or gods were watching him, and bit down on the trigger. The clearing of the lookout was suddenly illuminated in a bright glow, burning away the darkness as the fire's scorching light bit into every dark corner and shone brightly. Zuma and Rocky had to hold an arm up to shield their eyes, having spent too long in the dark of night, as their eyes were well unprepared for the searing brightness that now burned before them. Not even the rain could snuff out the flame. The only thing that would stop it was the limited fuel within it. Turning the gas valve up to its maximum was not an intended use, as this would cause an unstable flame to emit outwards continuously. Chase himself was nearly blinded from being so close, as the torch was directly carried in his mouth. Farrak's malice immediately stumbled backward and roared out, colliding with Rocky's kennel and making it rock to the side. Items and tools crashed to the floor inside it, and Rocky himself had to grab a wall to save his body from a painful fall. It was startled, enraged, constantly snarling and bracing itself as if the fire was about to shoot toward it. Zuma watched the encounter, narrowing his eyes as he studied the creature's actions. Despite being slightly disoriented, Chase backed up, glancing behind him at the forest. Get to the vents! All of you! The creature was fuming, moving left and right as if it were trying to outmaneuver the flame. After a second, it bounced forward, swiping its claws in one powerful motion, although they hit nothing. Further angered, it roared out its demented scream, honing in on Chase. Its tail flared to life, curling over its back and pointing forward. With an enraged roar, it blindly speared the tail forward into the fire's light, but it stabbed into only the air. The attack had missed by mere centimeters, nearly penetrating Chase's skull. Zuma took the opportunity to drag Marshall out and start moving him outside, aiming to reunite with Rocky while the threat was distracted. Its tentacles were spiraling out like erratic worms, its tail flicking in all directions as it set its sights on snuffing out the burning flame before it. The blowtorch had limited fuel. It wouldn't last forever. Taking another look behind him, Chase decided in a split second. He turned around and ran, taking the torch with him as he sprinted away into the trees. With what little remained of his light, he had to draw the monster away, even for a few seconds. He briefly heard Marshall's call as he ran, tearing across the wet grass toward the trees. A snarl sounded behind him as Farrak's malice quickly caught up with him, closing the distance between them in mere seconds. It spread its claws and dove them toward Chase's body. The shepherd quickly whipped around, thrusting the burning fire and waving it around. The monster of gore screeched out in response, flexing its claws and swinging its arms wildly. Chase turned and ran again. He knew he couldn't outrun it, but the torch would give him just enough to bite it back. However, the flame was dying fast, and how long until Farrak's malice bit the bullet and entirely powered through the fire? Adrenaline coursing through him, Chase charged through the bushes and entered the forest. Farrak's malice growled, then looked up at tall, towering oak trees. Connecting the dots in its head, it sprang up and latched its claws into a tree, climbing up into its high canopy. Go, go, go! Zuma hurried outside, pushing along a panicked Dalmatian. Where's he going? Marshall worried aloud. It followed him in the forest! Good. Maybe he'll keep it there. The two met up with a fearful mixed breed standing outside his kennel. Follow me. There are vents behind the lookout. Rocky flicked his head in their direction. We can use them to get in the tower. What about Chase? Marshall chipped in, turning his weary eyes to the walls of trees. He seems to have made up his mind, Zuma said quickly, pulling him along. Let's go! Seizing the opportunity with the creature distracted, the trio of dogs took off through the rain. Rocky quickly ignored the wetness, realizing greater things were at stake, and there was no time to fear something as trivial as water. Zuma continued leading the Dalmatian, almost ready to drag him if it felt like Marshall was about to run after Chase. The firefighter didn't fully understand why Zuma distrusted the shepherd, a fact that frustrated the lab, but he promised to explain later when they weren't staring down the eyes of death. Their quick run around the tower ended when they came up behind the structure, briefly passing both the destroyed breaker box and the waterlogged carcass that was once a gopher. The three approached a rectangular vent cover behind the tower, just big enough for a puppy to fit inside. However, a quick observation revealed there was no way to open the cover. Wait, there's no handle, Zuma realized. How are we supposed to get in? Rocky took a second to wipe the rainwater off his face. We could cut it open or force it? But Chase took the blowtorch with him. The mix whipped around, baring his teeth. Do you see any other options? I'm just trying to help. Well, try harder, Rocky barked. I have a crowbar in my kennel. Somewhere. I was hoping we could be quieter about this, but I guess that's the only way. Half a mile away, Chase was running for his life. Sprinting as fast as he could through the wet grass, throwing himself through bushes that drenched him in blinding water every time, navigating around trees that were nearly invisible in the dark of night. One wrong move could be his end. He had never run so fast in his life, and knowing there was an active pursuer on his tail was spiking his anxiety. The only way he could see forward was the light provided by the blowtorch in his mouth, still burning intensely, and sparks of fire and ignited propane. However, this also made him a literal beacon, the light visible from at least a mile away to anything that could be following him. He had no plan, no direction, no idea where to run. He could be going in circles, and he'd never realize it. Chase continued in his sprint, weaving around a tree and jumping over a log. He glanced behind him for a brief moment, trying to get a read on if Ferox Malice was following him. Yet he saw only the infinite void of trees he'd been seeing since he entered the forest. Suddenly, his paws painfully collided with an object he couldn't see, tripping him up and launching the puppy forward. The torch flew out of his mouth and landed some ways away. He fell hard, clipping a tree and bouncing off into a puddle of water. He could barely even make a noise before his world suddenly flipped sideways, complete with an aching sting in his head and paws. The puppy groaned, twitching for a moment before he opened his eyes. His vision was spinning. Water almost went up his nose before he picked his head out of the puddle. Ignoring the pain, Chase hobbled up. His body was a wreck. He looked around, realizing his light source was gone. Where? He felt like a lost duckling, abandoned in unfamiliarity and surrounded by things waiting to kill him. He took a blind step forward, then another and another, trying to find a direction while stopping to shake the rainwater off. Thunder sounded overhead, almost mockingly, as the sky very briefly lit up with lightning, illuminating his surroundings for a split second. An echoing scream could be heard in the distance, yet the sound bounced off the trees and surrounded Chase. Ferox Malice was nearing fast, and for all the abilities that the creature seemed to have, was night vision one of them? He hobbled a few more steps, his paws howling in pain from the fall. After a few seconds, he caught something in the corner of his eye, a burning red light. The blowtorch. Chase perked up, beginning to make his way toward it. Then he stopped. Ferox Malice was a predator, clearly adept at getting what it wanted. Chase gulped, trying to keep his composure as he slowly backed away from the light. When he reached about 6 meters away from the lit torch, the puppy reached down and grabbed a small rock in his mouth. Heart racing, forehead flooding with rainwater, he took a deep breath and tossed the rock over to the torch. It landed almost in the fire, and for a moment nothing happened, but Chase was unmoving. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Ferox Malice dropped down from the sky, seemingly dislodging itself from the tree it was in. Roaring out its scream, once again forcing Chase to cover his ears as the sound ignited static in his head, the creature smashed its paws into the torch, suffocating it into the water. The light ultimately died out, waterlogged, and snuffed into nothing. The monster had been waiting. It found the torch early with no dog attached to it. It chose to hide overhead in the cover of the leaves and branches, waiting for its prey to walk over and reclaim the tool. As the creature snarled, brutally driving the tool deep into the mud, Chase quickly turned and snuck away. He wanted to run, but any sound would be his death. Ears flattened, Chase crawled under a log, grimacing as he sunk himself into mud and bugs. The creature had surely realized by now its trap failed, indicated by an agitated hiss. He heard footsteps, but was unable to place their direction. He would be found eventually. He had to return to the tower and regroup with his friends. The dirtied shepherd was about to step PAW outside his cover when he heard a low growl behind him, and he quickly retracted further under the log. Shaking in the mud, he had no idea where the creature actually was, only that it was somewhere behind him. It was just one growl. What did it mean? Was it moving away or coming closer? Did it truly lose Chase, or was he mere seconds from death? Suddenly, the log above him lurched downward, smashing into Chase's back. He suppressed his pained cry, the log already pressuring his spine. It wasn't over. The log was pushed further. Chase bit his tongue as hard as possible to withhold his own screams as he was crushed underneath. If his spine wasn't going to snap, then he was going to be forced into the ground, buried in mud, and left to suffocate. Ferox Malice had its paw on top of the log, propping itself up to get a view of its surroundings, trying to locate its prey. Was it truly unaware of Chase's location? Or was it executing him, burying him alive in the ground? Chase tried to shift himself to his side, but his body was trapped. He struggled to get a gulp of air as water began to rise over his nose. His paws and arms were pushed deep into the soil, effectively rooting for his incoming grave. His lungs began to writhe, quivering and pleading for air as the puppy fought to keep his nose up. Jagged wood began to cut into his head, and water leaked into his mouth. The log was forced further, pressing the dog into the ground as he began to be slowly consumed by the darkness. With the final hiss of irritation, Ferox Malice turned, releasing its weight from the log. Chase was milliseconds from suffocating to death when his burden suddenly lifted, his nose shooting out of the mud and desperately inhaling. He struggled against the holding mud, wrangling his arms and legs free from their hold in the ground, shooting out his front legs and gripping whatever solid ground he could find. Finally dragging himself out, he quickly coughed up grime that had slipped down his throat, then took a few deep breaths. His fur was completely slathered in mud and twigs, obscuring his natural colors and making him resemble that of a swamped corpse. His back was in agony from the overhead assault, but he had to return to the others. Looking around fearfully, his muddy ears pricked at another unworldly shriek in the distance behind him. The monster was surely going back, looking to finish Rocky, Zuma, and Marshall if it couldn't have the shepherd. The blowtorch was gone, its comforting light now dead. And so fell the only tool Chase knew of that made the monster even hesitate. "Rocky," Chase said to himself, his concern growing as he looked around, trying to find a way out. "Marshall." If he was going to get home, he'd need to follow the only indicator he had, Ferox Malice. It was headed back, and if he didn't follow it, he'd be forever lost in the maze of trees. Shaking himself off, which was painful as his spine was still recovering, he mustered up his courage and crept off in the direction of the monster's roar. "Rocky, come on!" Zuma whined as he looked around in worry. "I heard its roar! It's coming back! I've never done this before, okay?" The mix shot in reply, trying to carry the heavy crowbar in his mouth. "You need to wedge it right under the hinges." "Even if I manage that, these things weren't made for puppies," Rocky griped. "I don't think I have the strength to rip a vent cover off the wall. Just try!" Marshall was pacing back and forth, trudging through the mud as the falling rain hid his distressed tears. Rocky steadied himself, then stood up on his back legs. Walking on 2 instead of 4 legs was an awkward experience, but he needed the height to successfully jam the crowbar in. After a few attempts, he gave a yip of triumph as the tool was wedged in place. Got it! Rocky lowered himself back down, and Zuma quickly came over. We just need to get this thing open. That'll be a group effort. Rocky stood up again, swaying for a moment before the handle of the tool in his teeth. He thought for a moment, then let go and instead grabbed onto the handle with his paws, fearing breaking his teeth from the force. Zuma approached next, standing up as well, gripping the handle with the mix. Marshall, get in here! Zuma called over his shoulder. The Dalmatian looked up wearily. I'm not strong enough for that. You're still the third dog! Come on! Muttering quietly, Marshall nervously walked over and tried to stand up. He'd done it before, but the rising dread of the circumstances made it difficult to do even the simplest things. After a few seconds, Marshall managed to stand and join the two in holding the tool. All right, pull! Rocky commanded. All three dogs pulled the tool with all their might, but the cover didn't budge. They tried 4 times, each attempt containing even more effort than the last. But no matter how much they tried, they simply weren't strong enough. Farouk's malice emerged back in the clearing, slinking through the trees with silenced movement. Its beady eyes scanned its surroundings, noting each kennel. Growling slightly, it trudged forward to hunt down the remaining meat. Seconds after it left the trees, Chase's mud-covered head emerged from a bush, hushed and alert. Following the creature was one of the most haunting events of his life, although not as haunting as killing Sky. One snapped twig or rustling shrug would have completely alerted it, leading to an inescapable death. He had been successful so far, managing to make his way back. He took one paw and crept out of the bushes, watching the creature approach Rocky's kennel and peer inside. The shepherd's heart skipped a beat, immediately fearing for his friend. But Farouk's malice merely turned its head away, going to another den. They had followed Chase's words, likely all at the vent right now, perhaps even far away in safety if they had opened it long ago. Creeping through the darkness, Chase kept a far distance from the monster, using his muddied appearance as camouflage as he made his way behind the tower. It's no use! Rocky panicked as he gave the crowbar another hopeless tug. We're going to die! Marshall said, pacing. Okay, I'm in charge now, Zuma growled, turning to the others. Follow me! The Dalmatian suddenly jumped in the air in surprise. Ah! The other two quickly turned their heads, wide-eyed at their friend's outburst. Both the mix and Lab froze aghast at the sight of the creature before them. A creature caked in blood and mud. Quiet! Chase insisted, looking around. It's here! I couldn't keep it in the forest! Marshall fell backward, sticking all 4 legs straight in the air as he laid with a shocked expression. Rocky blinked, shaking his head. Chase? Is that you? What the hell happened to you? Zuma exclaimed at the shepherd's grisly appearance. You look like a swamp monster. I narrowly escaped death, that's what happened, Chase replied hastily. It's still in the clearing, and I'm pretty sure it just heard Marshall. We need to go, now! We can't! Rocky protested. We're not strong enough to get this thing off! Oh, for God's sake! Chase snarled, flattening his ears at his friend's hopelessness. We're all about to be dead in 4 seconds, and you just give up? The shepherd quickly shouldered past the Labrador, standing up and gripping the tool. All 4 of us should be more than enough. Rocky and Marshall quickly moved to grab the tool once again, but Zuma hesitated for a brief moment. He was happy to see his friend alive, but deep down, A part of him had been hoping Chase had run to his death in the forest. Shaking the thoughts away, he quickly came up behind and joined in the group effort. "Now!" Chase gave the command. The four of them lurched back, putting in every amount of effort they had. There was no greater motivation than knowing that failing to do this one thing would result in the complete extinction of the Paw Patrol. As if by some miracle, the vent cover broke under the pressure, snapping from the hinges and falling to the wet soil. Screws and broken bolts were flung into the air, landing in the water like little drops of metal. The vent was now open, revealing a dark, hot, narrow corridor that led into the inner workings of the lookout. "We did it!" Rocky exclaimed. "Go!" Chase turned to them. "Get inside! I'll follow!" The shepherd quickly helped Rocky inside, pushing him in, then turned to Marshall and helped him as well. He turned to Zuma, holding out his paw as a way of offering a boost. Zuma merely stared at the shepherd for a brief second, a blank look on his face. Chase frowned, lowering his paw slightly. The lab suddenly walked forward, pushing past Chase as he climbed into the vent on his own, rejecting Chase's assistance. While slightly perturbed, the muddy police dog thought nothing of it and jumped into the vent. Ferox Malice had been searching a blue kennel when it heard the Dalmatian scream. It picked its head up, standing at a firm 7 feet tall as it arched its torn ears, trying to narrow on the sound. Its tentacles danced in the air, tasting for sounds and smells it could pick up on. It stood still like an antenna and was close to relaxing as nothing else met its ears. Then the vent cover fell. The sharp, unmistakable sound of tearing metal rang out well within its hearing. Snarling, Ferox Malice bared its teeth as it narrowed in on the sound. After a few moments, it turned its head in the direction of the tower. The sound had come from behind it. Getting down low, the creature began to silently stalk its way over, its thin tail flicking behind it.